have a lot to cover in this episode, thanks to your questions from Facebook. From getting around, crossing the border, our route, ferries, food, fuel, and cost. The top 5 attractions you won't want to miss, helpful resources, and a couple of places we missed. First up, getting around and crossing the border. For those that are new around here, we've had a few border issues when it comes to crossings. From veggies to fruits, particularly oranges.
What the heck? Oh my gosh, Mark, you just, he's gonna choke on his oranges.
Getting back into the US needs a little bit of attention. When going into Canada, questions usually pertain to firearms, tobacco, and alcohol. The biggest question we receive about crossing borders is with dogs, and the answer is simple. Have all your records, and you'll likely never need them. It's Murphy's Law. When it comes to border crossings, answer all the questions respectfully and to the point. We've learned that less is more when approaching this interaction.
No.
Don't need firearms or weapons.
No.
Mace.
No.
Pepper spray, taser gun.
No.
Any firewood guns?
No.
Have a great trip. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Facts. We might do some things through here, and we're going to come through here. We're going to go up here. Let's start with our route. We crossed the border in New York and skirted the city of Montreal, only because we've been there before, and focused on Quebec City, which was short but very fun. If you haven't been, add it to your itinerary. You'll feel like you've been completely transported.
This is fantastic. Oh my gosh, teleportation. Bonjour.
You might want to get over. You can still get over. Oh, is that a parking? Are they parked?
New Brunswick is a wonderful province with great people and plenty to do and see. But this was our first time being so far east in Canada, and we just focused on making our way to Nova Scotia to visit some of the top attractions, and we'll cover all of that right here. Our first stop in Nova Scotia was Parsborough, which is right off the Bay of Fundy, giving us our first glimpse of this amazing 52-foot tide. We then visited the wine country of Wolfville, Nova Scotia, of which we would have liked to have stayed longer if we had known just how beautiful and yummy this place was going to be. Wolfville is a charming town with vineyards and great food. Plan accordingly. We wanted to visit Kejimkujik National Park and found a guiding canoe trip to not only experience the park, but learn about the history. We enjoyed our time in this part of Nova Scotia. We then looped our way around the southern coast, visiting friends along the way.
Chin.
All right.
Welcome to
Here you
Scotia.
Before arriving in the largest city, Halifax. Just outside of Halifax is a top attraction, Peggy's Cove. There's plenty to do, see, and eat, and we even visited the Titanic gravesite. Then we made our way to Sydney, thanks to an invitation from Rob, a KYD subscriber, to go out with Captain Paul. We caught over 500 pounds of lobster. If you haven't seen that video, we'll link it here. After experiencing more amazing hospitality of Nova Scotians, we finally visited what we think most people travel to Nova Scotia to see, Cape Breton.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, brother. Whoa.
Whoa.
Right. Woo! I know what
Wow.
I'm doing. This is awesome.
And then we made our way to Prince Edward Island, the PEI, and back to the States, all in 5 weeks, starting in mid-June. Now let's get into the details. Road conditions. Once you cross the border, you won't notice much of a difference in the road conditions. The signs will be in both French and English, which makes it very fun. The roads on the Trans-Canada Highway are in great condition with plenty of fuel stops. But as you make your way into Nova Scotia, you may find a few more potholes and bumpy sections and narrow 2-lane roads. Nothing a big rig can't handle, but not quite as smooth, likely due to the winter conditions and being a bit more remote. Another great option for getting around are the ferries. There are 3 to consider. Obviously, the only way to get to Newfoundland is by ferry, which leaves from North Sydney, and we'll talk more about this beautiful destination shortly. Another ferry to consider is going to Prince Edward Island. You should know they only charge when leaving the island, so you can take the ferry one way and save time, and depending on which direction you're going, take the bridge back. The other ferry to look into is from Nova Scotia to Bar Harbor, Maine, saving time driving if you've already visited Montreal, Quebec City, or New Brunswick. The biggest question we received is if Nova Scotia is big rig friendly, and the short answer is yes. Although the roads may be a bit more narrow, there were big rigs everywhere we went, and campgrounds that could accommodate long RVs and motorhomes. Now let's talk about my favorite subject, food. There is plenty of it in Nova Scotia, including some delicacies that are a must-try when visiting. You probably already dabbled in having a little poutine when traveling across Quebec, but the staple food in Nova Scotia is the donair. Think of the donair as a gyro, but topped with a sweet sauce, and it's famous for leaving a little heartburn for later.
But at some point tonight when you're sleeping, you will feel like there's a hole being burned in your chest.
Oh, great.
Do you have antacids?
If you enjoy scallops, there's no better place in Canada, and maybe the world, than Digby.
It's like the scallop capital
Of the world.
of something. I don't know of the
Of the
what.
area.
Of the area.
Of 10
Certainly
mile
the
radius.
area.
10-mile radius.
There are a couple places to try, but we visited Carla's Takeout, and they really were some of the best scallops we've ever had. Eating out can be expensive though, so we were grateful for the exchange rate currently being in our favor. Speaking of money, make sure you have a credit card that won't charge you fees using it outside of the country. We usually like using American Express for this reason, but it was commonly not accepted in Nova Scotia and Quebec. Here's an interesting tip. When you use your card to purchase, there's a pop-up choice to process as Canadian or US. Choose Canadian and let your bank do the conversion instead of the local ATM or merchant, which might not have as favorable of an exchange rate. You'll also appreciate having a bit of cash on hand to buy fresh produce at a stand along the road or use at the RV parks that are cash only. Now let's talk about why you came here in the first place, what to do, see, and experience. This season had many peaks and lasting memories, starting with the Bay of Fundy and its amazing tide. There are two great ways to see the tide, and we highly recommend both. The first is being able to hike along the cliffs at Soley Cove when visiting Parsboro. Of course, it's key to have a guide, as the tides here are no joke, and few people truly understand the danger until seeing it for themselves. We took a guided hike with Anna and linked her website below. If you want to follow in our footsteps, pun kind of intended, there's nothing like hiking along a coastline, seeing a juvenile bald eagle, and watching the tide come up shockingly fast and drastically changing the landscape. Just on the other side of the Bay of Fundy, you'll be able to ride the tide, quite possibly ranking in the most memorable activity we did in Nova Scotia. We toured with the Shuby River Wranglers, but visit their website for exact times as their tours change daily based on the tides. It's hard to explain what it's like to see a river change directions 4 times a day, so you best just experience it for yourself. But not all activities require extreme measures. There's plenty of beauty to take in, including visiting one of the most popular lighthouses in Nova Scotia, Peggy's Cove. Perched high, this is a great place to reflect on your travel and just listen to the ocean swallow the rocks below. As we drove toward Cape Breton, we started to see a lot more RVs, and it became obvious that this is the big destination in Nova Scotia, and for good reason, especially driving the Cabot Trail. The Cabot Trail is a loop, and many RVers drive the entire route, But due to weather, we elected to stay in one spot in Shetty Camp and drive from there. The most popular hike is Skyline Trail, and we cannot disagree. The views are stunning, and we decided to stick around for a couple more days to see it in the sunlight. Many people will tell you not to drive or tow your RV on the Cabot Trail, but we saw plenty of RVs and even a tour bus. But that's not to say that it's not tight and even treacherous at times. But there are campgrounds along the trail, so you do what you're comfortable with. There's still one more attraction in Nova Scotia that you need to make room for, and will leave the biggest memory of all. That's the people you meet, the spontaneous events that happen along the way, and the things you can't plan for. So when you're planning, leave a little space for the unknown, go with the flow, and say yes to the things that you might not normally do, and chances are good, those are the stories you'll be sharing for the rest of your life. When it comes to planning, there are a couple resources we think might be helpful. We use mostly these two books. And we'll put links down below. They've been really helpful to understand the different regions. And one of the things I really love about this one from Lonely Planet is they give you itineraries, and they break them down into, like, do you have 10 days? Do you have 3 weeks? So that's really helpful to me. And if something wound up on a 10-day trip and a 3-week trip, I was like, okay, so you think that's important. Many people asked, how much time do you need? And that really depends on where you're going and what you want to take on. Nova Scotia is not that big, but it does take some time to get there, so you'll want to make the journey worthwhile. We'd say 3 weeks is plenty, especially if you know where you want to spend more time. We visited from mid-June to mid-July, and although it doesn't normally rain as much as it did for us, the peak season seems to be August and September. If you travel in the peak season and have a big rig, be sure to make reservations in advance. Because the season is shorter, we've heard that Cape Breton in the fall is stunning, and it happens here earlier than in Maine, so plan your trip accordingly to maximize fall travel and colors. If you enjoy destination videos, we did a 2-part series on the top 100 places to visit in the US, and we'll link that here in the description. There were 2 places we didn't visit, but we always like to save a little for later. The big one was Newfoundland. Some say it's even more beautiful than Nova Scotia. I'm not sure that's possible, but it does require an expensive ferry, so you'll be inclined to spend at least a couple weeks over there. The second is Oak Island, a place we didn't even know about until the comments started rolling in. If you find this trip on your itinerary, you'll be delighted by the beauty, food, and culture of Canada. Remember, though, that most adventures have their fair share of challenges. Maybe even something breaks on your RV, or things just don't go to plan. But when we look back, those are just a piece of the story, and it's what makes RVing worthwhile and satisfying.
Yo, here's a white flag too. You're probably gonna need this.
We look forward to sharing with you the next adventure in Iowa and have even more surprise destinations to come as we transition into our next season of travel. Thanks for joining us each Sunday, and we'll see you next time.
Oh yeah, yesterday it literally burned my legs, and then I got in and I was like, oh, this is nice actually. I was not expecting this.
Are you driving us?
I'll drive for a little bit, you know.
Okay.
Usually get tired around 35 minutes now. And you take over.
That's when you tap out.
That's when I tap out.